Alrighty, so evolution. How do we know this? It's a theory, and you've got to understand this is only a theory, and science works in theories, not in facts. We understand these things can change quite rapidly. But there are two groups of evidence, the original evidence, and now we've got a whole lot of molecular evidence that we've been able to follow since we've discovered DNA, and we can use DNA to trace these things. So part one, we're going to look at that original sort of stuff. So our modern theory of evolution puts a common origin at about 4 billion years, so early life at about 4 billion years. The planet's about 4.6 billion years old. And obviously over that time, many animals have become extinct, or plants. Life has become extinct and speciated, and it keeps on happening. We've had 5 major extinction events, and therefore 5 major flourishing events following them. And the original evidence for that was basically the fossils, this idea of biogeography, looking at the physiology, the anatomy, and then of course some early biochemistry, but it's really moved on now to some bigger things. So fossils are obviously the most important, the one that's got people re-asking questions, what the hell are these things? They don't exist anymore. Where do they come from? Remembering that we were to believe from the church that all life had been created by God and put on the planet at the start and was always there. So where do these ones come from? What are they doing? How do they exist? So these are preserved remains. So it can take the form of a trace, a cast, an amber, or a preserved body part. And the process of fossilization is really quite a difficult one, which is why there are so many holes in the process in this. So the odds of any one individual becoming a fossil is really, really small, particularly for an animal like ourselves. An organism dies and has to be buried quite quickly in an area that will remain undisturbed. So this is a good starting point, isn't it? Oxygen needs to be excluded, so you need to be covered in sediment quite quickly. The hard parts of our body, so all our bones, all the soft part will just deteriorate or disappear. The hard bits are left behind the bones. And they leach out and leave a cast, which gets filled in by minerals that come through with further sedimentation. And the whole thing has to be buried for quite a long time for this all to harden up. So as you can imagine, getting a cast of a fossil of a living thing that's soft-bodied or small, likely to be eaten by scavengers, is really hard. So finding fossils is not so easy as you might think. We can have impression fossils, and my head's in the way, but there's a classic slate with leaf patterns on them. These are casts. These are bones that have been replaced, and the 3D image created mineralization of them. The classic old amber from that film, what's it called? Jurassic Park. And we've taken the DNA from the insect's body there because it would contain it. Or we find traces like footprints, teeth, eggs, nest, poo, believe it or not, fossilised quite well. And we can age these things because we now understand the planet is 4.6 billion years old, and we can actually look at what's called stratigraphy. So looking at relative age of stuff. Here's our soil layer, and the bottom is seen as being oldest, and that's the youngest. And I can date the bones and the rocks and the soil in them and get a rough age of each of those bands in that location. And often you find what are known as, in words, it's going to be index fossils. A fossil you find in that particular band of soil all around the world. And you get a good age for those. And that allows you to age things in comparison to it. So it's not an exact age, it's a relative age. We can also do what's called absolute dating. We get an age by reasonably straight, close to reality. But again, it's a little bit, give or take a bit. So we use carbon-14 because carbon-14 decays back to nitrogen. And I can look at the ratios of carbon-14 to nitrogen in a fossil and get an indication of how old it is. Because half of the carbon-14 will have decayed to nitrogen within 5,730 years. Okay. So it works okay for things that are under 40,000 years of age. So recent fossils. For older fossils, you can use a thing called potassium-argon, because potassium will decay to argon, and the half-life is about 1.2 billion years. So half of the potassium will now be argon after 1.2 billion years. So for very old things, we can obviously get a reasonably good idea of age. And there are a few other techniques now as well. I'm rushing because I realise I've got a lot to get through before the time runs out on me. We didn't used to think the Earth was very old, and Bishop Usher of Dublin or somewhere worked out that the Earth was actually created on the 20th of October, 4004 BC, by working through the Bible, begetting, generation after generation. You got a reasonably good date for it. It's crap, but it holds sway for a long time. But it doesn't explain the Earth at all. And of course, once we started realizing that the Earth is in motion all the time, and these plates are constantly in motion, and we're moving northward at about 10 centimeters a year, something, crashing in here to the Himalayas and causing them to grow. That's why the Himalayas exist, because our plate has crashed into the Asian plate. And of course, you have all these volcanoes along here. These are earthquake and volcano zones right along these plate margins. A whole lot of geology there to be spoken about, which we haven't got time for. But it opened up this idea that, okay, maybe the planet's older, and they can explain why these fossils exist. So these plates move on convection currents essentially within the magma below the surface. So that's heating and rising and cooling and falling, heating and rising, cooling and falling, and the plates above will move. I won't get too involved in that because I haven't really got time to pull it apart. And time now goes back to the Precambrian. So we've got earliest records of life here about 4 billion years ago. Which I've got some archaean fossils I must try and dig out for you. And some really small, soft-shelled animals here. And then it flourishes. The Cambrian is this huge flourishing of life. We break this up into eras, periods, and epochs. And we currently live in the recent or the Holocene epoch of the Quaternary period of the Cenozoic era of the Paleozoic eon. They love their terms, don't they? Go and break things up. So in the Precambrian, you have things like these stromatolites, and these stromatolites still exist in Western Australia off the coast. There's a huge collection of bacteria basically creating these structures. So in a sense, they're a little bit like coral in the way they've built the structure for themselves. And they're ancient. These things are ancient. And then in the Paleozoic, we start to see these lovely bony fish start to appear. These are more interesting fossils start to occur as well. We've got stuff to be fossilized. The Mesozoic, of course, is well known for its dinosaurs. And about 65 million years ago, when the dinosaurs disappeared, Mount Eliza, Mount Erin, and Mount Martha came into existence. A huge, tumultuous change to the planet at that time that probably helped with the end of the dinosaurs. And then the Cenozoic is when we start to see flowering of plants and a rise of mammals as a dominant life form, and of course, finally ourselves. So biogeography, I should get myself out of the way because it's showing the spread of the planet a bit here. There we go. Showing the splitting up of the planet. Biogeography sort of uses this idea of how things were linked. So you can see this is all Gondwana here, which we're part of this Australia. There's Antarctica, South America, Africa. Oh, maybe it was Madagascar. And it's all pulling apart. So at one point in time, animals and plants on this landmass were similar. And we then find fossils of these things. So this beautiful Nothofagus, which we find in Tasmania and around Mount Macedon and a few places in Australia, in Victoria, we've also found the fossils in Antarctica. The waratahs found in Antarctica. These galaxid fish are found across Gondwana lands. They're survived in Australia, but their fossils are found across Gondwana. And of course, all the flightless birds exist out here in the Southern Ocean and are closely related. There's a cassowary and all those sort of animals, rheas and kiwis and all those. So these things are evidence of change and connection between these parts of the planet. Oh, I've done that well. Okay, I'll click stop for now, and I'll come back with the other stuff later.